On September 12, 1977, the struggle against apartheid in South Africa suffered a significant setback with the death of Bantu Steve Biko, a prominent voice of black liberation in South Africa from the mid-1960s until his tragic demise, while in police custody in 1977. Biko held a preeminent position in the anti-apartheid movement, and in some circles, he was regarded as the most influential black South African leader of his generation. He was of such importance that the apartheid government regarded him with great fear. Bantu Steve Biko inspired a generation of black South Africans to embrace their true identity and reject participation in their own oppression. Sadly, Biko paid the ultimate price with his life. In this installment of African Biographics, we delve into the life and enduring legacy of Steve Biko, one of the key figures in the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. Born as Bantu Steve Biko on September 18, 1946, in the Eastern Province, now Eastern Cape, of South Africa, he was the third child of Muzingayi Matthew and Alice Nokuzola Biko. Steve's father initially worked as a policeman and later as a clerk in the King Williamstown Native Affairs Office. Zingai, Steve's father, was an intelligent man who pursued a law degree at the University of South Africa through distance learning. Unfortunately, he didn't complete enough courses to obtain his law degree before his passing. In 1948, when Steve was only 2 years old, the family relocated to Ginsburg Township, located just outside King Williamstown in the Eastern Cape. Despite Alice Nokuzola's modest income as a domestic worker, the Bikos eventually became homeowners in the Brownlee section of Ginsburg, residing on Zahula Street. Tragedy struck when Steve's father, Zingai, passed away suddenly in 1950, leaving Alice Nokuzola to raise their children on her own. She worked as a cook at Grace Hospital while raising Steve. As Steve Biko grew up, he was known among his friends for his sense of humor and jovial nature. His primary school teacher remembered him as a mischievous boy who often went barefoot. However, his teacher also recognized his exceptional intelligence, and he was one of the brightest students in his class, often helping his peers understand complex concepts. Steve passed Standard 6 in 1959 and, in 1960, he enrolled at Forbes Grant School, a school that would produce many prominent post-apartheid figures in South Africa. Steve excelled in mathematics and English during his time at Forbes Grant and, in 1962, at the age of 16, he completed his junior certificate. It's essential to note that Steve Biko was growing up in the midst of apartheid in South Africa, which imposed significant hardships on the black population. Under apartheid, South Africans were categorized into 4 racial groups: Bantus, South African natives, coloreds, whites, and Asians. Black South Africans faced limited educational opportunities, as skilled jobs were reserved exclusively for whites. Despite being natives of South Africa, black individuals were relegated to the Bantustans after the enactment of the Promotion of Bantu Self-Government Act in 1959. From 1961 to 1994, more than 3.5 million people were forcibly relocated from their homes to these Bantustans, plunging them into poverty and despair. Apartheid also imposed the requirement for black people to carry passbooks at all times, granting them access to public spaces designated for whites. This was the challenging backdrop against which Steve Biko was growing up. In 1964, Steve received a bursary to join his brother, Kaya, as a student at Lovedale, a prestigious boarding school in Alice, Eastern Cape. During this period, political activism was on the rise at Lovedale, with prominent figures like Thabo Mbeki getting expelled due to student strikes. Steve himself would later face expulsion after being taken into custody by the police, who came to the school to arrest his brother, Kaya, for suspected involvement with POCO, the armed wing of the banned Pan-Africanist Congress, PAC. Despite a lack of concrete evidence connecting Steve to POCO, he was expelled from Lovedale. This incident left Steve with a strong resentment toward white authority, shaping his future political trajectory. Subsequently, Steve Biko enrolled at St. Francis College, a liberal boarding school in Natal Province. There, he developed his political consciousness in an environment where the replacement of South Africa's white minority colonial government with an administration representing the country's black majority was a central theme. After matriculating with excellent grades from St. Francis College, Steve registered for a medicine degree at the black section of the medical school of the University of Natal in 1966. He resided in Alan Taylor Residence, the segregated living quarters for black students at the university. Early on, he displayed an insatiable thirst for knowledge that went beyond his medical studies, becoming one of the most prominent student leaders on campus. Within the university, there was a tension regarding racial representation in student politics. While the National Union of South African Students, NUSAS, aimed for multiracial membership, it remained predominantly white due to the majority of South Africa's university students being white. Steve Biko believed that NUSAS failed to adequately represent the needs of black students, and this discontent was exemplified at a NUSAS conference in 1967. During that conference, black students, including Steve Biko, were aggrieved by the separate accommodations provided. White and Indian delegates were given dormitory lodging, while black Africans were told to sleep in a local church. These conditions starkly highlighted the racial segregation enforced by the Separate Amenities Act, which allowed for the unequal treatment of different racial groups. This event deeply affected Steve, and fueled his growing resentment toward the multiracial approach to political activism promoted by NUSAS. Profoundly dissatisfied with NUSAS, the National Union of South African Students, the now disenchanted Steve Biko, alongside several of his peers, established the South African Students' Organization, SASO. In its inaugural Congress held at Teflop in 1969, Steve Biko was elected as the first president of this organization. SASO emerged as a response to the frustrations experienced by black students within the liberal and multiracial NUSAS. Its core mission was to encourage black students to become active participants rather than mere spectators in a game that had long marginalized them. SASO's primary focus was to address the pervasive inferiority complex that had led to passivity among black students. It didn't take long for SASO to evolve into a potent political force, spreading its influence to campuses across South Africa and beyond. SASO engaged in various community-oriented initiatives, including providing legal aid, medical clinics, and support for the development of cottage industries in disadvantaged black communities. Inspired by Steve Biko's burgeoning legacy, the youth in high schools throughout the country organized themselves into a movement known as the South African Students Movement. This movement played a pivotal role in the 1976 Soweto uprising, which accelerated the trajectory of the liberation struggle. During this period, Steve Biko and SASO began sowing the seeds of the Black consciousness movement. This philosophical outlook encouraged black individuals to recognize their inherent dignity and self-worth. More on the Black consciousness movement shortly. Around 1970, leaders within SASO started considering the limitations of organizations restricted to student members. As a result, the idea of a broader community-based organization began to take shape, leading to the launch of the Black People's Convention, BPC, in 1972. Steve Biko founded the BPC as an umbrella organization for the spreading Black consciousness movement that was gaining momentum on university campuses nationwide. Steve Biko played a crucial role in the development and formation of the Black Workers Project, a core SASO initiative co-sponsored by the Black Community Programs. These programs aim to address the challenges faced by black workers, whose unions were not yet legally recognized. While Steve initially performed well in his university studies, his academic performance gradually declined as he devoted more time to political activism. 6 years into his medical degree, he found himself repeating his third year of studies, and in 1972, due to poor academic performance, the University of Natal barred him from further study. Following his exclusion from medical school in 1972, Steve Biko joined the BCP at their Durban offices. The BCP was involved in various community projects and published an annual journal called The Black Review, providing analysis on political trends in the country. Giving up on his aspiration to become a doctor, Steve Biko enrolled in various courses at the distance learning institution UNISA in 1973. he began studying law and political science, subjects more relevant to his political engagement. Steve Biko's political activism was underpinned by the philosophy known as the Black Consciousness movement. His experiences under apartheid shaped this philosophy, which focused on liberating the minds of black people who had been systematically relegated to an inferior status by white power structures. The Black Consciousness movement viewed the liberation of the mind as a primary weapon in the struggle for freedom in South Africa. It regarded black consciousness as an inward process, where black individuals could regain the pride and dignity stripped away by the apartheid system. Steve Biko's philosophy sought to elevate the heroes of African history, and promote African heritage to dismantle the notion of Africa as the dark continent. It aimed to extract positive values from indigenous African cultures and make them a standard by which black people judged themselves, thereby resisting imperialism and apartheid. In apartheid-era South Africa, black consciousness aimed to unite citizens under the common cause of their oppression. Steve Biko's charisma extended far beyond university campuses, turning the Black Consciousness movement into a nationwide phenomenon. The apartheid government initially underestimated the impact of black consciousness, believing that it aligned with their policy of separate development. However, as SASO's membership grew, the government began cracking down on Steve Biko and other movement leaders. In 1973, 8 leaders of the Black Consciousness movement, including Steve Biko, were banned. This meant that they were restricted to their local areas, could not attend political meetings or rallies, and were limited in their interactions with others. Despite the banning orders, Steve Biko and the BCP office he established in Ginsburg achieved remarkable success in community projects, including the construction of a clinic and a crash for local residents. Steve also played a pivotal role in founding the Zimeli Trust Fund in 1975, assisting political prisoners and their families. As the Black Consciousness movement continued to gain momentum, particularly among students in Soweto, it became a significant presence throughout South Africa. However, this movement faced severe repression from the apartheid government, which escalated its efforts to suppress it. On August 21, 1977, Steve Biko, along with Peter Jones, was detained by the police. During his detention in Port Elizabeth, he endured brutal torture and interrogation. Tragically, Steve Biko died in a hospital cell on September 12, 1977, due to brain injuries inflicted by the police. Steve Biko's death garnered global attention and outrage. It exposed the brutality of South African security laws, and contributed to Western countries' decisions to support a United Nations Security Council vote to ban arms sales to the apartheid government. Years later, at the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, the truth about Steve Biko's death emerged. In 1997, 4 former police officers admitted to killing Steve Biko 2 decades earlier, but failed to obtain political amnesty in 1999. Steve Biko was a towering figure in the struggle against South Africa's white minority rule and is arguably its most renowned martyr. His legacy of black consciousness remains highly relevant today, a legacy of resistance and self-determination in the face of widespread oppression.